Hey everyone, welcome to Practical Alchemy. Today I'm going to be running a beginner's tutorial showing you all the basics that you'll need to know to get started in Fusion 360. Now, my personal modeling philosophy is that the best way to learn is not by understanding every single tool at once, but to really understand the workflow and the process and the right way to set up models. And once you understand that, you will be able to model anything. So today I'm going to be showing you how to model this construction brick and walking and talking you through my process as we go. First thing I'm going to do is delete everything out of my workspace. So we're starting with a blank canvas, and let's talk about some navigational basics. What you're going to see in front of you here is the primary workspace. This is where all of the magic happens. And it looks empty. It is empty right now, except for this ground plane. This grid is the ground plane. And imagine this as an empty three-dimensional box. And up here in the corner, you have what's called the Triad Manipulator. If I click on the Triad Manipulator, you can see that I can rotate the workspace from the front to the top, the right, the left, the bottom, and the back. All right. I can also use the Triad Manipulator, click on it, any of the faces, and when they're highlighted, it will snap the workspace to that view. All right, so now that you understand that we're looking at a empty 3D space, the next thing I want to call out is how to get around this workspace. There are some navigational options here at the bottom, but what I would really encourage you to do is to get used to the hotkeys and your middle mouse button. So you can use the middle mouse button. When you scroll the middle mouse button, it's going to zoom you in and out of the workspace. If I click the middle mouse button, it's going to allow me to pan around the workspace. And if I hold down Shift while I click the middle mouse button, it's going to allow me to rotate around the workspace. And that is what I'm going to use pretty much all the time to get around, in addition to the Triad Manipulator up here in the corner. Next thing that I want to talk about is axes. If I looked at this grid plane, you can see there's some numbers on the corner. You've got and some colored lines. You've got the x-axis in red, you've got the z-axis in blue, and you've got the green axis, which is moving up and down. So we don't see that at the moment. And then along these points, there's a 0, 0, and then an imaginary third 0. This point here, 0, 0, 0, on our coordinate system, is called the origin point. That is the home base for everything that we're going to model. So I'm going to be referring to the origin point a lot. And that's about it in terms of navigation. You can also go up here in the corner, and as you can see, if I click down this down arrow, it's going to allow me to toggle the visibility, not only the origin point here, you can toggle that on and off, but also the XY axis, the XZ axis, and the YZ axis. Now that we've got some basics on navigation, it's time to start modeling. Whenever you're modeling in a solid body modeler like Fusion 360, there's essentially 3 steps. First step is to create a flat two-dimensional sketch. Second is to extrude that sketch into 3D space. And then finally, you're going to make some modifications to that extrusion or multiple extrusions. So to show you how to do this, let's start modeling our construction brick. So I'm going to click to create a 3D sketch or a 2D sketch on the top bar here, and then it's going to bring up a prompt. So when I stop moving the mouse for a second, it's going to show me what the prompt is, which is to select a plane or a planar face. Because I'm going to be looking at this from a top-down view, I'm going to select the top plane. So as I hover over to it, you can see it changes colors, and I'm going to click, and it's going to snap. So as you can see, I've now got the x-axis and the y-axis looking that way. Now, it's time to start creating something. Right now, this is empty. There's nothing in this other than the grid line. So we need to create some geometry or draw some things into this space. We are going to start off by drawing a rectangle. So you can see up here along the top bar, there's some basic shapes. And then if you click down, the drop down will contain some additional options. First thing we're going to do is a simple rectangle. So click on the 2-point rectangle. If I stop hovering, it's going to show me what the prompt is. Click to drop the first corner, and click again to drop the second corner. And now we've got some geometry. We could extrude this right now, but we're not going to, because this geometry is what we would call unconstrained. As you can see, if I click and drag on any of these edges, I can move this around. and I can change the proportions. Well, I'm trying to model a specific object, so I don't want to change the proportions, and I want the proportions to be in a certain spot in the 3D environment. So what I need to do is I need to go through and start constraining this sketch. All right, so let's talk about constraints. There are essentially two different types of constraints. There are geometric constraints and there are dimensional constraints. Because we've created a rectangle, the computer program has already put some constraints on it. You see these little tick marks here in the corners. And as you can see, if I go to the sketch palette over here in the corner, you may or may not have the sketch palette by default. You may have to expand it. But one of the options here is to show and hide constraints. So as I click and toggle that on and off, you can see that there is something happening here. These are the horizontal and vertical constraints. So that means that by default, these two lines always have to be horizontal and these ones always have to be vertical. That is the nature of the rectangle. So it has some constraints, but it's still under constraint. I can still make changes to it. What I want to do is I want to lock this rectangle so that the center point is constrained to the origin point. And to do that, I need to add some additional geometry. So I'm going to go up here to the top bar, click on the line tool, and it's going to bring up the cursor to select the first point. As you can see, as I go up to the corner, this changes, or as I go along the line, to an X. That is the coincident constraint. That means that this point needs to be on this line. If I go all the way up to the corner, you can see it turns into a square. That is when you have two, essentially an intersection constraint, where two intersection coincident constraints. All right, then I'm going to click and drag the other line down to the bottom corner and hit escape to leave the line tool. All right, now the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to define the midpoint of this line, because the midpoint of the diagonal across a rectangle is going to be the midpoint of the short and the long end. So come over here to the create menu, click on the drop down, and I have the option to create a point. And as I scroll over this midline, you can see that a triangle pops up. That is the midpoint constraint. So I'm going to hover over till I see that triangle. I'm going to click to drop it, and you can see it is now constrained to the midpoint. All right, now the next thing we need to do is we need to say this, where this midpoint needs to be in space, which is here at the origin. So I'm going to click and drag, and as you can see, anywhere I drag this rectangle, this point will always be in the center. And when I hover over, it's going to change colors, and boom. This rectangle is now constrained to the origin point symmetrically. When you're just starting out, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it really is a core principle of this style of modeling. It's not just about putting some dimensions around that rectangle. It's about using the constraint relationships that you have the ability to define to reflect the nature of the geometry itself, where your model is and where it's going to be symmetric across the center line. All right. It's more constrained, but it's still a lot of blue, which means it's still under constraint. I can't change the position in space, but I can still adjust the proportions and the dimensions. So now we need to add some dimensional constraints. To do that, I'm going to come up here to the top bar, and I'm going to add some sketch dimensions, which is going to bring up the sketch dialog tool. I have the option of selecting one line. I can select multiple lines, and it's going to do some different things depending on what I do. For this example, I'm just going to select this short face, and when I drag it up, click again to drop it, and now it's going to bring up the dialog box asking me what I want this to be. I'm going to set this at 50 millimeters. Hit enter, and that is going to set that at 50 millimeters. If I click on that dimension, I can move it around, and if I double click on it, I can modify that dimension. But I'm going to keep it at 50, so no changes need to be made. One thing that you may be running into at this point is you may be in inches. I'm not sure what your default settings, but to change that, all you have to do is go down over here to the document settings, click the drop down, edit that, and you can change the unit type to inches, or in our case, we would like it to be millimeters. All right, and hit cancel because I'm not making any changes. Next thing we want to do is change the height of our box. the last thing that's unconstrained. So I'm going to click the dimension tool, sketch dimension tool again, and this time I'm going to select 2 lines. I could just select this, but I'm going to click here and here to show you how to select multiple lines. I'm going to hover off to the side, click to drop the dimension somewhere where it's easy for me to see and easy to use, and I'm going to type in the length dimension. This is a 3x2 brick, so we're going to set this to 75 millimeters and hit enter. All right, great. And now what you can see is everything in this sketch has turned black, and meaning that it is now fully constrained. We have fully defined what this sketch is, and so I can hit finish, and it's going to pop us back into the 3D environment where you can see we've got a 2-dimensional sketch. Next thing that I'd like to highlight with you is there is some changes happening down here at the bottom. Namely, we now have what's called our feature tree or our feature history. All right, and there is one sketch in it. If I right click on this, I've got a few options. The first thing I want to do is rename it so I know what it is later on. I'm going to call this the master layout sketch and hit enter. I can also go back into the sketch. So if I right click on it and hit edit sketch, I can go back and, let's say, change those dimensions. If I wanted it to be a 4x2 brick, I could do that. And then when I'm done, I hit finish, and it'll swap me back to the main environment. Next thing we need to do is to extrude this into a 3D object. So I'm going to go to the next option here, which is to extrude, and it's going to ask me what the profile is. I'm going to select the portions of the sketch that I want to extrude, and you can see that I can click and drag it up in the 3D environment. It also has a dialog box where I can enter the dimension that I want. I'm going to start off with 30 millimeters and hit enter. There are some other options there, but you really don't need to know about them at this point. All right, now, next thing I want to draw your attention to is over here in the drop-down menu, there is a new folder called Bodies. And in this Bodies folder, you now have a 3D model. You have a 3-dimensional body that you can interact with. As you continue to model, you may have multiple bodies in the workspace that you will select, turn on and off, and modify together. So I'm actually going to click and click again here to call this my 3x2 stud brick. My 3x2 brick, and hit enter. Great. So we've got a box, we've got a 3D object, but it's not really a construction brick yet because it's missing its studs. So we're going to go through that same process again to create the studs. I'm going to create a 2D sketch, and then I'm going to extrude it in 3D space. So let's do that. Click here to create your 2D sketch, and now you can see I've got some additional options. Not only could I select those planes I had originally, which I can select either in the 3D environment or from the drop-down here, but I can also select any 2-dimensional face inside of the environment. I'm going to select the top of my construction brick, and now I'm going to be sketching on this top surface. Okay, so we need to add our studs, and I'm going to show you a few different things that are going to be really interesting to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is draw a horizontal and vertical mirror line or center line. So I'm going to go up here to select my line tool, hover over to the origin, and you can see it brings up the blue square. That means it's going to snap. As I drag up, it's going to snap to the midpoint of this edge. Then I'm going to click on the center again and out here to this edge and hit escape to exit that tool. Now I'm going to click on one of these lines, hold down the shift key to select multiple objects, and click on the other line. As you can see, they've turned blue because they are selected. Then I'm going to go over to the sketch palette. Again, your sketch palette may or may not be expanded, and under the line type options, I'm going to click center line. That means that these have now been defined as center lines rather than construction lines or geometry lines. Next thing that I want to do is start thinking about where these different studs should go. Now, obviously, the center studs are going to be on this line, and they're going to be along the middle because any construction brick is going to break down essentially into 1x1x1 components. So I'm going to go up here to the creation menu, and I'm going to select a center diameter circle. So the first thing that I'm going to select is the center point. And I don't need to create a point. It just kind of knows that there is a midpoint here. And then when you hover over, you can see that it brings up the midpoint. Click, click again, and then hit escape. You can see this is blue. So while it is locked to that midpoint, I still have not defined the diameter of this circle. So I'm going to come up here, select the sketch dimension, click, click again, bring up the dialog box, and I'm going to say that that is 15 millimeters. Hit enter and escape to exit the tool. All right, now I know geometrically that my next construction brick is going to be centered along this same line. So what I'm going to do is click a line again, click on that midpoint and drag straight up. Actually, I'm going to not drag straight up because I want to show you that if I click here and I hit escape, what I can do is I can add a horizontal or vertical constraint by clicking this line, hit the horizontal or vertical constraint, and as you can see, now it is locked to the vertical. It's still not fully constrained because I haven't defined the length of it, but at least I know it's going to be vertical. Next, I'm going to add another circle. So click here on the menu, drop the center, click to drop the diameter, hit escape, and now I've got another circle. I want to use this as an opportunity to show you another constraint called the equals constraint, which means that I can set the dimension of one thing equal to the dimension of another thing. I'm going to click on this circle, hold down shift, and click on this circle, and then I'm going to hit the equals button. And as you can see, with this constraint enabled, I can now, anytime I make a change to this geometry, it will echo into the other geometry. All right, now the next thing that I need to do is define where this circle could go. There's a few different ways that I can do that. One thing that I could do is to click on this line and click on this line to create another equals, right? Because we know that these are on the square. But what I'm actually going to do, because I want to show you another dimensioning trick, is click on the line tool, click here and click on this corner and hit escape. What do I know about this stud? Well, because this is on a 1x1 grid, I know that this has to be on a 45-degree angle, right? This is 90 degrees, this is half of it, that would be 45 degrees. So I can click on the sketch dimension tool, click on this line, click on this line, and as you can see, it brings up the option to find that angle. Hit 45, hit escape, and everything is turned black because this is now a fully defined sketch. I don't really need these two lines for extrusion. I only need them for construction. So underneath the line type, I'm going to click construction to convert those to construction lines. All right, just so they're a little out of the way, they're not impacting the geometry, and I can move along to the next thing. Now I could repeat this process and set every stud automatically, but Fusion is pretty familiar that most construction things are going to be symmetric, so I have the option to do what's called a mirror command. If I go up here and I select the mirror command, it's going to bring up a dialog prompt. And in that dialog prompt, I've got two things. One, the object to mirror, and second, the mirror line. So first, I'm going to select the object to mirror, which is going to be this circle. Then go over here to select the mirror line, and then when I click on this line and hit OK, you can see that I have now mirrored that brick across this center line. I'm going to repeat that process to get all three studs over to the other side of this rectangle. So select the mirror tool, select each of these objects. If I click it again, or if I accidentally click the wrong object, I can just click it again and it'll remove it from the selection. And then go over here, select the mirror tool. If I selected the wrong thing, I can hit the X button to remove it, and then select it again, hit OK, and now I've got all 6 of my studs. Everything's black, no unconstrained geometry, so I'm going to finish the sketch, and now I've got those on top of my block, and I can make an extrusion. So I'm going to click in the negative space, just make sure nothing is selected, hit extrude, and now I need to select which profiles I want to extrude. So I'm going to select each of these studs. All right, and I can click to drag them up. Now, only other thing that I want to show you here is that we have a new option. Now that there is already a body in this 3D model, to change the operation. Right? I can either create a new body, or in this case, I want to join. So any new geometry that's created that's touching the old geometry should be joined to that body. So let's just go in here and we'll say the stud height should be 5. Hit OK. And you can see here over in the bodies folder, there is still just one body. Everything is connected, which is what we want. It's one part. And boom. Now this is really starting to look like a construction brick. So, dialogue up here. One thing that I've totally forgotten is to save. Oh man, if there is a one of the 10 commandments of 3D modeling, it is save often. So let's go ahead and call this our Lego brick. Hit save. We want to save our object often, and we are almost done. You've almost through. So there's one more thing that I want to share with you before we close out this video, and that is take another look down here at the model tree. All right, there are now 4 things. There's not only your master layout sketch, but there's also this primary extrusion, the stud sketch, and this secondary extrusion. Now let's say I'm going back here, and now that I'm looking at it in 3D space, I go, you know what, this is actually a lot taller than I wanted it to be. I actually wanted it to be a squatter brick. The great thing about solid body parametric modeling is that this feature tree is live and it is editable. All right, nothing is baked in. It's what we call non-destructive modeling. So once I create something, it's not just like set in stone. I can always go back and make changes to it. So if I go back to this main extrude, hover over it, right click and hit edit feature, you can see it brings up the dialog box where I can now go in and I can change this to say 20, hit OK. And because I have not changed anything that's dependent on that sketch, everything still works. The top feature, the sketch plane that I used here, still exists. It's just moved down 20 units. All right. So this is really the core of designing parametrically, which is something that we are going to be talking a lot about in future videos. But I think this is going to be a good stopping point for today. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you'd like to learn more about Fusion 360 and continue on this tutorial series, hit subscribe so you'll be notified as new videos come out. If you had any questions, you can leave them down in the comments. I'll try to get to them as I can. And if there's any topics that you'd like me to discuss in future videos, leave those in the comments as well, and I will review and plan content accordingly. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative to you, and I hope it has inspired you to continue learning Fusion 360, hopefully with me. See you in the next one.